Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this show on May 20, 2025. It's day 1182 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. And Chuck, it's also an important anniversary to recall. It was on May 20, 2022 that the defenders of Mariupol finally surrendered the Azovstal steel works. It was their last stand in Mariupol, Chuck.
And truly one of the most heroic stands in 21st century combat. And you can probably put that up, expand that by a century. You literally had a handful of men and women holding off the entire might of the Russian army. And they were eventually gassed and starved and dying of thirst when they did surrender. But prior to the surrender, there were also incredible feats of heroism performed by Ukrainian pilots, who it is almost incomprehensible to believe that these pilots flew at street top level under ground fire to transfer, actually to reinforce the garrison and remove the wounded.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
It is incredible. I would actually encourage people to go back in time and watch or rewatch 20 Days in Mariupol. This is the documentary that I believe has won many awards and deservedly so. This was shot by a team of journalists who were the very last to leave Mariupol. They were lucky to get out, and it's a very moving film, but it also shows you what the early days of Russia's invasion were like in Mariupol. And now this might be a good time, Chuck, for folks to remind themselves why they support Ukraine and to remind themselves why Ukrainians are united in continuing to defend themselves from Russian occupation and invasion.
Well, it is quite possible to get war fatigue. And I use that term advisedly, of course, because we are not there living under the air raids, living under the bombings. Alan has just returned from Ukraine. I knows it as well as anybody. We've both been studying this war since before day one. And it's easy to lose sight of just the facts, right? Ukraine was not invaded to denazify it. The Ruski Mir, as they call their liberated territories, there is nothing left of Bakhmut, of very little less of Kupiansk, of Pokrovsk, of Mariupol, of which we just spoke, which is surrounded by so many mass graves that are visible from outer space.
Yeah.
Don't lose sight of what we're talking about here.
Right. No one knows how many civilians the Russians killed in Mariupol. The estimate ranges from 20,000 to 80,000. That when you hear an estimate like that, no one really knows.
And I would just use this one little image. We've all seen the Russian trooper carrying a toilet out of a building. Ha ha ha. Imagine the kind of people who would come into your house and steal your toilets. What do you think they did to the rest of the house? Yeah. What do you think they did to the people in there? It's a kind of a cold thought, huh?
Yeah.
So don't forget who the aggressors are.
No, even if President Trump can't figure it out, If he doesn't know that the Russians are the aggressors, and that he's putting pressure on the victim when he should be mounting pressure every single day on Russia and on his good friend Vladimir Putin. Uh, this means that your understanding is all the more important and more meaningful. And one of the ways to get that understanding is to watch the first time or rewatch 20 Days in Mariupol, or Ben Goldhagen's film To the Zero Line. Go all the way back and watch the documentary Winter on Fire, which is about the Maidan Revolution, and just come to grips again with why we find Ukraine in our hearts, I think, forever.
You know, we have an interesting moment, and there's lots of interesting moments in this conflict, but apparently Washington has called Moscow, and they have compelled, cajoled, flattered, whatever it took to get Mr. Putin to announce that no one wants peace in Ukraine more than he does. And I think he's probably speaking about the situation in what's left of Mariupol. That's his idea of peace. I don't see this going very far. Alan, do you? Or am I just the Lone Ranger out here?
No, I don't think the war is coming to an end. I don't think Putin wants peace. He might want to talk about it as long as possible as a way to conceal what he's planning to do this summer in Ukraine. I'm pretty certain that the Russians are preparing as big an offensive as they can possibly pull off in June, July, August, probably right on into the fall. Putin wants to grab as much more territory of Ukraine as he possibly can. And while he's trying to do that, he'll talk about it. And he'll let Donald Trump think that, yes, there's progress towards a ceasefire or towards peace, when in reality there's none. I mean, for God's sake, Chuck, why did the Russians throw the largest number of Shahed drones at Kyiv in the course of the entire war? Almost 300 in one night, right?
Well, that's just it. Putin is not going to come to the table in good faith. It simply is not going to happen. Look, he is a KGB man. We've often spoken of him as the last Homo Sovieticus, right? The last Soviet man. KGB agents do not negotiate in good faith.
No.
They do not, split the difference. They're not going to do anything like that. They're not going to make accommodations. They are not going to mediate. Diplomacy, negotiations, talking, it's just how he says, nice doggy while he's picking up a stick.
Yeah.
So it's not going to happen. And who are you going to speak to? Lavrov? Right? The guy who told Liz Truss there isn't going to be an invasion? No. It just isn't. Nothing can be expected of this.
No.
There's only one thing that Russia understands, and it is Alan Brewer's theorem. They only understand force. So let's try something no one's ever done, which is arming Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much that the United States could do. The supplies, the military supplies flowing to Ukraine from the United States will continue through much of the summer. These are what I'll call the leftovers from the Biden administration. They haven't been cut off, but they will come to an end this summer unless Trump or Congress comes up with a new military package of assistance to Ukraine. I was happy to see that Australia is going to deliver 41 Abrams tanks to Ukraine over the objections of the Trump administration. But what gets me, Chuck, you know, if you don't arm Ukraine adequately, what you're actually doing is lengthening the war. You're increasing the numbers of Ukrainian casualties, both soldiers and civilians. The most important thing to do is arm Ukraine in order to take a step toward peace. It's the only step available that I can see.
You know, over the weekend, our friend Axel Jacob and I had the good fortune to speak to Admiral Perry, Royal Navy, retired, but he formerly was the military attaché in Moscow. And of course, with his language capabilities and his cultural comprehension of Russia, and also, I will say, aided by his really impressive, almost intimidating intellect. This is a man who sees very far ahead of the curve. He had watched a Russian general, video, of course, of a Russian general in a symposium. And the question was asked of him, how do you see a path forward to victory in Ukraine? And the general said, I quote, "We will throw corpses at them." Corpses. And here's the chilling part. The entire room stood up and applauded thunderously.
Hmm.
They are willing to kill, and this is a quote from Vladimir Putin himself. He's willing to lose 2 million people in this war. Congratulations, Vlad. You're halfway there.
Yeah.
But 2 million dead. Attributable quote, 2 million dead.
Yeah. You know, every Ukrainian I met in Ukraine actually understands this. They understand that Putin and Russia will not stop unless they are stopped. They would understand perfectly what that Russian general was saying. We'll throw corpses at them. It's practically what the Russians are doing, sending soldiers on assaults who are limp across the field on crutches. Or, my God, there's even been a Russian soldier in a wheelchair, not a motorcycle, a wheelchair. It's one way that Russian commanders punish Russian soldiers, sending them repeatedly into attacks on the zero line, even though they aren't fit for battle. They're sent nevertheless. And of course, they rarely come back, but they are sent as punishment.
You know, I reposted a video today. It showed a 3-man Russian reconnaissance element that was crossing the Russian frontier into Sumy Oblast. A couple of things struck me right away. It was broad daylight. They were walking beside a tree line, avoiding available concealment. They were on a well-beaten trail, and they had absolutely no tactical acumen or situational awareness.
Wow.
And you can imagine how this ended with 3 drone strikes.
Right.
You send your best and brightest on reconnaissance missions, broad daylight, and I mean, out. Well, you know, look, and that's a symbol for the entire war. It's what they do. They don't even attack. They don't attack at night. They don't even attack at dawn. They attack at 10:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
It ain't working. It's not going to work.
You know, Chuck, we haven't heard much about the North Korean troops sent to help fight lately. And I don't know why. I mean, have they been pulled out of the battle? Are they back in Kursk, trying to defend Kursk again from the latest Ukrainian incursion?
Well, here's a couple of good assumptions we can make. The average casualty rate for a Russian contact with the Ukrainian force is 35 to 85%. Okay. Going into this, North Korean soldiers are trained with an almost Japanese level of fatalism, right? They are just going to attack until they extinguish themselves. Okay, so let's draw from those two assumptions, pretty solid assumptions. Their casualty rates will be disproportionately higher than the Russians. 10,000 troops at least were deployed into Kursk. I personally think that number might be 2 or 3 times higher. But I would imagine that their casualty rate was at least 40%.
Yeah.
So they lost 4,000 people, 4,000 dead, triple that for casualties. You're looking at 12,000 total casualties. Maybe that's why we're not hearing so much of them.
That may well be. I'm certain North Korea will send more. I mean, again, this is probably the number one concern that Ukrainians have, the manpower that Russia has to throw into this coming summer campaign. Not only Russians, but probably North Koreans. They just haven't popped up yet on the zero line again. And there are various reports coming from Russia that they are able to recruit roughly 30,000 new contract soldiers a month. That is about the number of killed and wounded in a month in Ukraine. Recently, the Russians claimed they were recruiting up to about 40,000 a month, which means they would actually be able to reinforce the forces in Ukraine. And who knows? We have to wait and see what the makeup of the Russian summer offensive is going to be.
Yeah, so and that's a good point for us to underscore here. They're losing 30,000 people a month. They recruit 30,000 people a month. All things being equal, guy comes into a unit. He's a new guy, just like you see in the war movies. He's got a picture of his girlfriend. He doesn't know his hat from a hole in the ground. Notice how I said hat and not ass. He's going to get the worst jobs. He has the least chance of surviving, and these guys are going to suffer proportionally. Let's say you got a unit of 60,000 guys, 30,000 of them are new. The people who are going to get eaten up are the new 30,000. The insoluble problem for Russia is, look, they are desperate for people. They are recruiting in Nepal, in the Central African republics. Every little godforsaken basket case of a nation around the world, there's Russian recruiters there. You're going to get an IT job in Moscow. We've all heard what these people have been duped into. They're getting destroyed, and the root cause of their instant extinguishment on the battlefield, like my 3-man reconnaissance team, is no one is training them at all.
Yeah.
You get a rifle and a green pair of pants and a green jacket and 2 magazines, and now you're fighting the Ukrainian army, right? The Ukrainian army that I think would give the U.S. Army a pretty good tussle, frankly.
I think the Ukrainian army would give the American army a pretty good tussle. For one thing, the Ukrainians know more about using drones than just
Anybody.
about anybody except the Russians. I mean, the Russians have obviously kept up with innovation in drone warfare. That's going to be a critical part of the coming battle this summer. You know, the other critical part is Ukrainian manpower. Ukraine just doesn't have enough infantry. I hate to say it, but they just don't.
Well, when we were speaking to Admiral Perry, and again, I encourage you to tune in on that if you get a chance. It's 3 men in a boat. It'll be the most recent one. In fact, Thomas, our friend in Denmark, our producer, is getting that up today. But Admiral Perry also stressed this, that the center of gravity of this war is Crimea, and in particular, Sevastopol. And he pointed out, as Alan and I discussed at the time and watched and saw, that what could have been one of the turning points of this war that did not materialize 2 summers ago, when the offensive was going to be aimed at the Sea of Azov. Missed opportunity, not because of failure of Ukrainian valor or their logistics or lack of insight or commandability by Ukrainian general officers. That offensive was smothered in its crib because the Biden administration, and just fill in Washington because we're dealing with the same problems, did not convince the Ukrainian war planners that they would have everything they needed once they started that operation.
Right.
Right. And halfway through a knife fight with the enemy is not a good time to discover that you don't have a knife.
Right.
Right. So we're still going to see that. We are going to see an offensive that goes to the Sea of Azov, cuts the Russian zones in half. We are eventually going to see the isolation of Crimea. We're going to blow that bridge. We are going to attack down the 2 transportation corridors, the M17 and the M18, because that's the way it has to be done. And I encourage everyone also to do this. Get out those history books and read about the Nazis versus the Soviets in the battles of Crimea in World War II.
Yeah.
That's going to have to happen again. The terrain dictates.
You're right. The terrain hasn't changed.
No.
The other thing I would say, Chuck, is that the longer the war goes on, even though the clock is something Ukraine is racing against, but the longer the war goes on, the stronger Ukraine will get. And maybe the European Union and allies like Australia, South Korea, will be able to replace the United States as the ally Ukraine needs for victory. And just that simple fact that now you're relying on the EU more than the United States, that fact alone argues for a much longer war, because the EU, although they'll be supplying artillery shells, the EU has to ramp up manufacture of all kinds of things itself.
It was interesting to hear Admiral Perry say this, but he said, these are his words, not mine. I wouldn't go quite this far. I say it because a European is saying it, that he felt Europe had been freeloading, riding free for these past decades. Because, and this is chilling, everyone always thought, he said, including myself, that the United States would ride to our rescue if it was necessary. Chillingly, he said, nobody counts on that anymore.
Yeah.
And that's not a good thing. But we have said again and again, the United States has proven itself a fickle and even feckless friend to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And that's not good.
No. I think that this summer is probably going to be one of the most critical points of the war for Ukraine. It has, 2025 is well on its way to becoming the deadliest year for Ukrainian civilians in the cities of Ukraine. There's really no city in Ukraine that's safe when you come right down to it. And the Russians have increasingly targeted residential areas in Sumy and Kharkiv and Kyiv and Kiviri in Odessa, in the Kherson. A lot of these cities are being hit just relentlessly night after night. If you're unlucky enough to be in Pokrovsk or Toretsk or in Sumy, you're also going to be under artillery shelling every single day. There's nothing left of Toretsk. There's nothing left of Pokrovsk. There's nothing left of Chasiv Yar. A little bit later, we'll be taking a look at the map around Chasiv Yar as well as the map around Pokrovsk.
Yeah, Ukraine's just sustained the biggest massive drone strike of the war. As Alan pointed out earlier, almost 300 drones. Again, targeting specifically dense population centers in Ukrainian cities. That's the primary target. Imagine if Washington, trying to compel the Russians to negotiate in good faith, imagine someone having the huevos to say this to Mr. Putin. You launched 389 Shahed drones at Ukrainian cities last night. As a consequence, we are going to send 389 ATACMS missiles to the Ukrainians. Fall where they may.
Yeah.
If you do it again, we're going to double it. So everything that you land on a city, you're going to get 2 ATACMS back. And we can do this as long as you think it's click, end of message. All right. Let's look, this is Alan's idea, not mine. So let's try it.
No, well, I'd put it in terms of money. I think there are only 389 ATACMS left, Chuck. So we could only do it once until we made some more. But
let's buy some Raytheon stock and get them to up the production.
You send 300 Shahed drones to attack Kyiv. We're going to announce a $300 million package the next day for Ukraine. You do it again the very next day, $600 million of military aid is sent to Ukraine. You just keep doubling it. I think that is the way to really tighten the screws on Russia, in addition to sanctions. And I know that the EU has announced new sanctions, the 17th sanction package, and they are already preparing an 18th. And yes, they are focusing on Russia's shadow oil fleet, sanctioning about 189 additional ships, as well as the captains of those ships, which is kind of an important addition. But just to speak briefly before we get to the maps and before we focus a little bit on drones, just to mention how deadly, how much risk Ukrainian civilians are under, and this is just in 2025. And Russia is using everything from Shahed drones to ballistic missiles in Poltava. In February, a KH-22 killed 15 people. Again, targeting a residential neighborhood of Poltava. In March, a combination of drones and Iskander missiles targeting in Dobropilia. High rises destroyed 52 apartments in 8 multi-story buildings, killing 11 Ukrainians and wounding 49. Everybody remembers the strike in Kiviri in April, again aimed at the residential neighborhood right near a children's playground. 20 people were killed, including 9 children, and 68 were injured. And then just a week later, in April, in Sumy, and this was on Palm Sunday, the Sunday before Easter. Russia launched a devastating attack on Sumy with ballistic missiles, and it killed 35 people the week before Easter, injured 117. So this is how deadly the war is becoming for civilians now in 2025. Um, and without more air defense, Ukraine can't protect civilians in its cities. Now, of course, air defense doesn't protect Kherson and Sumy and Kharkiv from artillery shelling, but it could help protect those cities and the civilians who live there from almost continuous drone attacks.
Yeah, there's a, good thing if you're a civilian keeping up with this war, don't lose sight of the fact that everything starts above you, whether it's infantry combat, air defense, your fighter cover, air parity, air superiority, etc. It needs to come from the top down. Now, in lieu of having airborne interceptors all the time, you can have air defense, and there's a food chain, right? And you've got the THAAD system and the Patriot at the top, and you've got these other systems. Ukraine needs to make its skies sovereign in order to protect its civilians. That means upping the air defense. And again, talking to experts over the weekend, where the F-16s and Mirages have been in combat, they are doing great execution, and that is the military term, against the Russians in these areas. You've seen an uptick in the number of videos showing Ukrainian precision airstrikes on troop concentrations and valiant points on the battlefield. Russian drone control centers. They usually take a big building, they operate on the third floor, they cut a hole in the roof, and the drones fly out, and these guys control the drones from there. Where Ukraine has used F-16s and the Mirages and the Hammer French guided bombs, along with small diameter bombs, JDAM-ERs from the United States, they are kicking ass.
Mm-hmm.
Russian assaults are broken up, and in fact, Ukrainian forces have advanced in many of these situations. Again, I have never operated in combat where we didn't have absolute air superiority. I never had to do anything more than pick up the phone and I got something to fall out of the sky on somebody. It's an important part of winning.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that Ukraine has what it is required to do the job.
Yeah, you cannot pick up the phone on the battlefield in Ukraine and call in an airstrike if you're on the Ukrainian side. You can if you're on the Russian side. But the Ukrainians have stepped up their use of especially these glide bombs being supplied by the United States, and with devastating effect, and always on a target that Ukraine knows a lot about. Who's there, why they're there, when they got there. When, hell, they know when dinner's served.
They do. And that's, so this is skipping around slightly, but I think we are right to anticipate and expect Russian offensive actions this summer. Notice I didn't say a Russian offensive, because here's what I don't think is going to happen. They are not going to put together 5 or 6 brigade task groups, operate them in concert, and drive for the Dnipro River. I don't think Russia's capable of doing that anymore. Now, that I am sailing pretty close to the wind when it comes to underestimating my enemy, which is not something you want to do. But we have seen, this will be our 4th summer.
Yeah.
They haven't done it yet. They didn't do it the first summer when they probably could have. Didn't do it the next one. I'm to the point now, Alan, I don't think they can do it. They can throw corpses at the problem.
Yeah.
But I don't see unified ground maneuver warfare. Do you?
I don't. I really don't. I mean, Russia's aims this summer are the same aims they had last summer. It's to fully occupy Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia oblasts, at least. They want to cross the Dnipro and take back Kherson and all of Kherson Oblast. I mean, that is such a tall order for the Russian military. Were they to attempt it, I think it would lead to a military disaster.
Yeah. Put this at this level. American troops, if you have 4 or 5 divisions of American troops, I expect them to be able to effect a river crossing in the vicinity of Kherson, encircle the city, and move on. Take charge and move out, right? That isn't quite as simple as it sounds, but 4 competent American divisions should be able to prosecute that problem. They have done it before. They crossed the Oder. They crossed the Rhine.
Yeah.
They did this fighting a peer enemy, and that was 70 years ago. So, okay, can the Russians do that? If they could, they would.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know how you do that with an officer corps that is a mafia family. The best and the brightest are not being selected for flag and colonelcies. You're in on the grift. That's your ticket up, right? And it's showing now they don't have officers who can lead men and women in battle.
No, they don't. They don't seem to have officers who can take a map and use it to plan a successful military operation. If they did, we know that the map wouldn't be shared with the field commanders because it's too dangerous to tell them what it is you're going to ask them to do, just in case they would object and choose to run the other direction, which has happened. Casualties, Russian casualties are hovering around 1,000 a day at the moment, and that's down a little bit. Engagements, and we are going to take a look at Chasiv Yar and Pokrovsk here in just a moment. But engagements are not really declining precipitously. It's just it's becoming a slightly different kind of war on the zero line that is more and more drone centric. I mean, I would suggest to our viewers, and maybe Thomas can find a video of simply the sound on the zero line. The sound under a swarm of drones. I mean, it's hornets, it's wasps, it's a fearsome buzz that holds your attention. And if I heard it, I think I'd pretty much freeze in place. Might be, depending on where I was, the right thing to do.
Yeah. This growling kind of snarl, just as Alan said, put 500 hornets in a mayonnaise jar. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And the thing that's most likely to kill you on the 21st century battlefield is a drone, right? It's not a well-aimed burst of fire, although that happens as well. You look at what has even changed in ground combat. It used to be, you have thermal and you absolutely rule the night, right? First it was night vision goggles, right? And then it, first it was night vision scopes, then night vision goggles, then, monoculars and the 270 degree goggles we used in the teams. Thermal used to be available for tanks because the gear was so big, no one could carry it around. Now you can get a thermal that's this big. And that means engaging in night combat, there isn't any place to hide. You got to get behind a tree. There are some things that work. I'm not going to go into them this way. But you can see, even when the Russians do try to move at night, they're getting smoked, right? Because you can't turn off that body heat. And you add all of those advances to the drones, which are carrying the same technology. That's the number one threat now. It has changed warfare profoundly. And this is another thing we talk about all the time, and our listeners listen to it all the time. It's easy to forget that this was an epic changing moment, right? This was a huge change. Like Attila the Hun took over the world because he had stirrups and recurved bows. Those two little innovations. Julius Caesar didn't have stirrups. Nobody had stirrups on their saddle. And that meant their bowmen could stand up on a moving horse and fire an arrow. Did that really mean anything? He took over most of the known world, right? Yeah. That's the kind of change we're seeing here.
It is the kind of change, as I've said before, and drones changed the war, and then they changed it again and again and again and again, and the changes keep coming with every drone innovation on the front line, or for that matter, on the sea. I think that's one of the places where Ukraine's innovation with drones has been most notable. It appears that the Russians are slightly ahead with fiber optic drones, but the Ukrainians are catching up. And again, the designs differ. The Russian fiber optic drones rely on heavier cable, less likely to break. The Ukrainian fiber optic drones use a lighter weight cable, actually gives the Ukrainian drone longer range, but does make that cable more prone to snapping. And then, of course, you've lost that drone. But it's the test on the battlefield of these innovations. It truly is the place where you have to prove your innovation gives you an advantage. And some of those innovations are tried, they fail, and it's back to the drawing board.
And, this innovation has been forced on Ukraine because the West still does not give them long-range precision strike munitions. So the Ukrainians invented them. We'll put up some examples here. I'm going to send the slides to Thomas. We can talk about the more efficient and advanced Ukrainian creations. For example, a long-range drone that functions as a cruise missile, but has a capability to use a solid rocket motor to sprint into the target.
Yeah.
Wow. Built in Ukrainian garages. And so it's not just improvising these weapons. Improvised is not the word. Rapidly prototyping them, proving them in combat, but then also conducting meticulous target research. We're speaking of Russian fiber optic drones. There was one plant in Russia that produced fiber optic cable. Ukraine struck the clean room in the plant, finding the critical plant and then finding the most critical part of the plant and taking that out. That's it. That's how you do this stuff. Instead of dropping a ballistic missile that's targeted on a pizza parlor in Kyiv.
Yeah.
Right. Or a train station in what it was in Kupiansk, yes. Full of refugees with a cluster bomb munition.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, look, the Russians insist and continue targeting on civilian targets for one reason only. It's an ongoing war of terror against Ukrainian civilians. And there's, unfortunately, there's no innovation that I can think of that is going to give Ukraine all the air defense it needs. The air defense it needs really has to come from the United States and from its EU partners. I don't think Ukraine is developing its own air defense. Plenty of Patriot battery systems available, plenty of NASAMS, plenty of Gepards, plenty of Hawk uh, uh, systems that the Army could ship to Ukraine. And why this isn't done again, uh, it baffles me.
And especially systems like the Hawk, obsolete only for a power like the United States.
Yeah.
Still pretty good and a quantum leap better than nothing. And there are hundreds of Hawk missile complexes available. They are sitting in the desert. Look, they might need a little paint, but they're ready to rock and roll. And look, it still works.
And thousands of missiles
Yes.
waiting to be shot out of those Hawk batteries. You know, they could have been used right around Chasivyar, Chuck. I think that's the first map we're going to take a look at. This is from 19 May. I don't think there is a structure left standing in Chasivyar today. It has been hammered by Russian glide bombs, and just about all of Chasivyar now has, I think, been occupied by Russian forces, Chuck.
Yeah, we have the map on this day. There was a bit of a Russian operational pause, and again, that comes and goes. This still remains, although it's not. It used to be the center of gravity of the Russian efforts, which is now switched to Pokrovsk, which will be our next map. But Chasiv is also a pretty good. It's emblematic of almost the entire war. You can see, of course, the adjacent city of Bakhmut. Chasiv is a suburb, if you will. Chasiv actually means peaceful ravine, which is a bit of cosmic irony. Russia probably lost somewhere between 100 and 200,000 dead to take Bakhmut. And everyone who's been listening to us for a long time, go get some coffee because Uncle Chuck's going to tell you the story you already know. Russia spent all of the men, all of the material, all of the resources to take Bakhmut, and that meant nothing as long as Ukraine held on to Chasiv, which 2.5 years later, it still holds on to Chasiv.
Yeah.
And to put this, to prove to you that no one goes to the war college in Russia, imagine right now you're a general, you point your fat, greasy Russian booger-stained finger on the map and say, I have now taken Chasiv. I will say, General, you are magnificent bear of Russian killing machine. Tell me the road that comes out of Chasiv, folks. Go ahead and zoom in on your map.
Yeah.
You'll notice there isn't one. There is a railroad that goes basically to the west and northwest, but there is no road out of Chasiv. This is a problem that a cadet should have figured out with a cursory glance at a road map, not a military topographic map. I am saying nothing to take away from the valor, determination, courage of the Ukrainian defenders of Chasiv. They have literally stopped a would-be superpower in its tracks. But this is one of the reasons why Alan and I don't see a summer offensive coming out of the Russians. The way to take Chasiv is to take Markove to the north of it and to take, let's see, I would drive to Chevrone to the south of it and unite somewhere around the town of Stinky. Yes, that's the real name. That's how you take Chasiv. 3.5 years later, they can't do it. And Alan, how many times have you heard me deliver this brief?
Well,
a lot.
I don't think I can count the number of times I've heard that, Chuck. But it is true. I'm not even sure now how the Russian war planners come up with a plan and to take Kostyantynivka. I mean, that is a primary target for them. It is a sizable city. The Russians haven't actually taken a city of any size for 2 years at this point. Uh, I don't know how they target Kostyantynivka. I know that they are running daily glide bomb attacks on the residents in Kostyantynivka. But I mean, how do they attack that city?
Well, that's that is the problem here. They're not going to get there. They're simply not going to get there. And as long as the United States does not repeat the betrayal that led to the loss of the Kursk salient, turning off the intelligence feed to the Ukrainians, the Russians are never going to be able to put enough troops in space in the battle space to do what we just said: take Markove and drive south towards Stinky and break out along the H32 axis and do the same thing, and then drive northwest to Stinky. In the meantime, I mean, is it too much for me as a war planner to expect them to do that? They lose a battalion's worth of men every day of the month.
Yeah.
Right? We're so used to saying they lost 1,000 guys today. That's a whole battalion. They lose 30 battalions a month and no results. Did General Patton ever lose 30 battalions? No.
Mm-mm.
Look, I expect more from a West Point guy, right? And you don't just go to West Point, then you go to the Command and Staff College, then you go to the War College. There are other command schools. You work abroad, you work with foreign armies. You're supposed to be like Admiral Perry, right?
Yeah.
Who, by the way, has a PhD in psychology, the only other officer I know with a psychology degree. This is what Putin should expect from his army. But how could he get it, Alan, with an army full of crooks?
Well, not just an army full of crooks, but an army with a war doctrine that dates back 80 years. And this is still the war doctrine the Russians follow. It's what Marshal Zhukov used to defeat the Nazis. Masses and masses, seemingly endless masses of Russian infantry. And Russia still does have that manpower superiority. They're going to use it in exactly the same way, these meat grinder attacks, I guess. I don't know. What else can they do?
Well, here is an intel item, and I won't divulge the source here, but there was a Russian functioning in a brigadier's capacity, brigade commander. On the books, he had something close to 1,000 men. Actually, he only had 200. He was drawing rations, pay, and allowances for all 1,000. Okay, this is where the story gets great. That battalion was ordered into the attack with a battalion-sized effort. He only had 200 guys. So they went through the motions of the attack, and then he reported, 800 casualties. Okay, that's why it's not working. And add to that the donkeys, the motorized scooters, the cars with no doors, the logistical nightmare, which, again, the logistics are completely screwed up, and they're doing the easiest thing there is to do: feed bullets, beads, and band-aids into the attack.
Yeah.
That's the easiest thing to do. The hardest thing to do is have your own supply bases overrun and you on the run and trying to supply everybody in time to get them to turn the effort around. That golden day is going to come, Alan. We're going to see it, because they're not going to solve the logistics problem before Ukraine goes on the offensive.
I hope so. I don't expect the Ukrainian offensive this summer.
I don't either.
It's going to take time, and it's also going to take assurance that everything they need they will get. Obviously, not from the United States necessarily, but from the EU, from other allies, and maybe Trump will surprise people someday, but I just don't think so. Who can change that man's mind? Who can make him see sense? I don't think that person exists on the face of the earth.
I I hope for this moment. I don't think that Mr. Trump will take well to being humiliated. And eventually, although I don't think it's Marco Rubio who will do it, someone will say to him, boss, Putin's making a monkey out of you, right? He's he has done nothing you've asked him to do. He is killing civilians nightly, and you're enabling him.
Yeah,
And eventually, perhaps, I think Mr. Trump is capable of being a vindictive man. We may see something turn around, but I don't think it's going to be a product of insight. This will be a psychological reaction in the technical term. He will react to an affront to his own dignity. Not right or wrong on the battlefield in Ukraine, not whether he was lied to, none of that,
yeah.
but making him look bad.
Well,
We'll see.
I think he's already been made to look bad by Putin, frankly, to look bad and weak. I mean, my God, he really does look like a Russian asset. I'm not saying he is. I have no evidence. No one really has any evidence of that. But he just, he's either that stupid or that compromised. Uh, who
Well,
knows?
I'd just throw a dart at the list of presidents of the 20th century and ask myself, what would Harry Truman do?
Yeah,
All right. What would Tip O'Neill do? Of course, not a president, but
right.
you know, the, these were statesmen, but they were also capable of really playing hardball. Like, okay, I get, okay, I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Politics is above my pay grade. I'll stay in the military lane here, you guys. But I don't see. I don't know. I don't know what to say. People know. You can infer what I think. I think.
Yeah, I think so. We know what Ukraine needs, and we know who has it to send. So
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty much where we come down on that issue. Yeah, so if we move on from the Bakhmut map, and as Chuck said, Bakhmut was the center of the Russian uh, campaign 2 years ago. But now that has moved to Pokrovsk. Uh, the Russian attempt to take Pokrovsk is part and parcel of their intention to occupy the rest of Donetsk Oblast. And in order to do that, they have to get past Pokrovsk. They have to occupy Pokrovsk. And it looks more and more like the Russians are stuck here in much the same way they were stuck between Bakhmut and Chasiv.
Yeah, that's a really good analysis there. And looking at the map, and I'm sure. Thank you, Thomas, for getting it up. Uh, you can see that as long as Ukraine holds on to Pokrovsk, and they are certainly holding on to it, there is no military utility in advancing farther to the west because you will have a strong enemy force in your rear. Uh, Notice that in this map, there has been Russian progression. It has gone back and forth as to who controls Kuturi. You can see that is on the rail line heading south out of Pokrovsk. That also is a highway that's co-located with the railroad. Kuturi has gone back and forth in Russian and Ukrainian hands. There is a space of about 5 kilometers, which is, just about 3 miles, that, the Russians get pushed back, they move forward, they get pushed back. And again, it's easy. You look at this and you see where the red is and where the red turns to green. That's the zero line, but the zero line is actually it's a much more mutable thing that anyone can depict on a map. This is about a standard day's fighting in this area where we've got, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 to 18 points of contact. Coincidentally, well, actually, I guess it just lines up. The points where you see the battle icons here are just about fought over every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens because the Russians have got to use established logistical lines to get their forces to the front. Now, if you can zoom in on your maps there, you can see that the Russian ground lines of communication are always going to be along those lines that you see that are basically oriented north-south and then east-west. Those are the lines of cover. Those are the tree lines and windbreaks that join the agricultural fields, and that's the way stuff has to move. So the battle is much more constrained than it actually looks. The other thing is that south of Pokrovsk, they're north of Pechene. Again, I've got bigger maps of Pokrovsk. I'll put up one here in the coming days of more of the city. The Ukrainians have managed to hold that southern access of the city. I don't think the Russians are going to take Pokrovsk in the coming months. Could they possibly take it? Yeah, but this place has held on longer than anyone thought it could. And again, I'll remind everybody, every bit of red you see on this map was the direct result of Russia taking Avdiivka. And that was 10 months ago.
Yeah.
So as Avdiivka, the Russians couldn't move past Avdiivka because the Ukrainians were dug in there. And again, you don't want a dug in enemy force in your rear. The Ukrainians have learned a lesson. They're holding Pokrovsk, and I would dare say that when you're looking at the western portion of this map, there are defenses prepared and lines for the Ukrainians to withdraw to slow any Russian advance. Okay, and I'll wind this up by saying the Russians are going to try to take Pokrovsk this summer. Mm-hmm. Whether or not we can see an executed military evolution that really beats what an offensive is, I don't know. But we'll see tens of thousands of Russian casualties in this battle space this summer, and maybe hundreds of thousands. We'll see.
Yeah, it depends on that Russian summer offensive plan. We won't know what it is until it unfolds before our eyes. But the Russians desperately do want to overrun Pokrovsk, and it could well lead to a Russian advance. But again, and this is probably the most zone saturated area of the front line. Drones are not equally spread across the front line. They are really concentrated in Pokrovsk, by both the Ukrainians and the Russians. And so that changes the very nature of the battle of Pokrovsk, frankly. I mean, and drones are probably going to be more important here than in almost any battle fought previously.
I absolutely agree. And the other thing is, we sit here and so casually project that the Russians are probably going to lose 100,000 people in this area this summer. Let me just want everyone to realize, look, is that number way too high? Well, they lose between 1,000 and 2,000 people a day, at least a battalion every day. So they lose a minimum of 30,000 people a month. That means 90,000 people just in 3 months of the summer.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is the center of gravity of Russian aggression. This is the place they are fighting for. It sounds incredible to say things like the Russians lost probably 300,000 people simply in Bakhmut, right? America lost 400,000 people in the American Civil War, the entire war on both sides. Russian casualties are staggering.
Yeah.
America didn't lose 1 million people in World War I and World War II together, but the Russians have lost it in what? 1,000 days of combat. They've lost 1 million men.
Yeah.
Again, they're commodity. It's like spent cartridges. Zero Fs are given.
Yeah.
They do not care how many people they lose.
Well, that's not only the difference between the Ukrainian military and the Russian military, it's also the difference between Ukrainian culture and Russian culture. Ukraine does everything it can do to preserve the lives of its soldiers, which is why you see Ukraine, they're not going to send a soldier where they can send a drone. And the drone defense that the Ukrainians have envisioned in order to blunt the Russian summer campaign, we're going to see how effective that drone defense is, probably first and foremost right here around Pokrovsk. And I don't know. I mean, if Russia were to concentrate its forces south of Pokrovsk, I think that would present a big problem for the Ukrainians, because I don't think Ukraine would be able to shift the number of troops needed to face that kind of Russian mass.
Yeah, mass is one of the important factors in modern battle, but it isn't everything. I mean, and it depends on where you come from, right? So I've never commanded a battalion, certainly not. The biggest thing I've ever commanded is about 40 SEALs, right? That's nothing. That's like one platoon of regular infantry. So I didn't have mass as something to factor in. I had surprise.
Right.
I had unity of command. These are all factors that one will become larger, one will become smaller. You have to use what you have. But the Russians, everything is against them. They have mass. They don't have unity of command. They don't have highly trained people. You look at, so I had X number of SEALs. It took 5 or 6 years to make one of those guys.
Yeah.
It took a lot. They were a resource to me. They were a resource. If you are a Vatnik who got plucked off the Moscow metro, 2 weeks later you're in Ukraine, you are worth nothing to anybody. Nothing. Which is a message we try to get out to our Russian listening guests. Look, get out.
Yeah.
Get out. Take the magazine out of your weapon, sling it over your back, and walk forward like this.
Right.
You'll get to go home.
Right. Follow that drone back to the Ukrainian line if you can, because the drone will do one of two things. It'll either kill you or it will lead you to safety as a POW in Ukraine. And those are the only two things that Ukrainian drone is going to do. Choose the one that keeps you alive. That's what I tell Russians. And in fact, Ukrainians send that message to Russian soldiers every single day. Maybe we are well past the time of seeing a mass Russian surrender, Chuck. I mean, it hasn't it hasn't developed. We thought it was possible back in the days of the Kherson offensive. A couple of other times there were some big surrenders of Russian soldiers, but they just I guess they are brainwashed to the point where they are going to stand and fight and take their commanders' orders and just move forward. It's hard
Yeah,
to
but I think you know, I'm glad you brought up those situations where they did occur. Also, you know, during the Kharkiv offensive, during the Kursk, Kherson offensive, and during the Kursk offensive, the situations in which we see this crisis of morale turn into surrenders, as soon as these guys are cut off from command, they have no organic loyalty up. You know, as we saw in Kursk, 100 guys realized they're no longer in touch with battalion. They threw in the towel.
yeah.
I think, you know, the battlefield situations that are going to have to evolve for us to see more of these, you know, surrenders at platoon and greater level when they are pressurized and when they are being pushed back. We're going to see it. And Ukraine never made a big deal out of this, but the entire Russian First Guards tank army, which is multiple divisions,
Right.
evaporated. They evaporated. Thousands of them surrendered. They lost hundreds of armored vehicles because they fell apart on the battlefield. And just one more thing I'd like to add, I'm going to keep our sights on who we are fighting. There is an ongoing cartel back and forth which surrenders returned prisoners of war, and Ukraine will hand over Russian prisoners. What Ukraine gets back are men who have been starved, beaten, denied medical care, in many cases tortured. Russia has indicated that it wants to change the cartel now. So it's no longer one for one. And here's where we cross into the territory of terrorism and genocide. Russia is now proposing 2 or 3 to 1. If they're going to give back one of your soul, you know, they want to do it this way. We'll give you back a couple of children and a couple of old ladies. We want, you know, we're going to bargain with the civilians that we have at hand, the children that we have captured. Who does that?
Yeah.
Well, Hamas does that. Hezbollah does that. You know, the axis of resistance does that. So these are things that happen and they blip. Alan and I watch all this bubbling cauldron very closely. Some of the bubbles that come up are really noxious.
Yes.
And they just remind you what's going on here, who we are fighting. You know, Ellen and I cover this so closely and we almost don't cover anything else. But I always wonder, why isn't this on the front page of the BBC Ukraine section? Why isn't it? You know, we're not making this stuff up. You know, we've got great sources. Sometimes it's on Russian social media and I get a translation, bang.
Yeah.
You know, 25 minutes later.
I don't know why it's not on the front page more than it is, frankly, and nor do I understand why on some front pages of newspapers here in the United States you find Russian disinformation. For example, that Ukraine started the war. You know, you cannot quote a liar telling a lie if you really want to cover a news story. You have to demote that quotation to propaganda and not touch it and not run it. Seek your own understanding, and for God's sake, don't put it on the front page of the newspaper. Rather, put the Russian brutality on the front page of the newspaper, put the Russian terror on the front page of the newspaper, the Russian abduction of tens and tens and tens of thousands of Ukrainian children. Talk about atrocity and talk about genocide so that you can help people understand that, yes, this is a genocidal war. It doesn't have to have concentration camps like Auschwitz to be a genocidal war. It is Russia's aim to erase Ukraine as a nation and as a culture and as a people. If you erase the culture, you erase the people. If you abduct 200,000 Ukrainian children, the next generation, you're committing genocide. And that is what Russia aims to do. It is just a fact that people need to come to grips with, Chuck.
And this isn't a projection. This isn't a selective filtering of history. We can see the Holodomor, which killed at least 4 million people who were deliberately starved by Stalin. You had the obliteration of the Crimean Tatar ethnicity who were scattered into labor camps in Siberia and killed in their tens of thousands. Russia has always despised Ukraine.
Yeah.
Jealousy comes into it, the intellect and innovation of the Ukrainian people who are responsible for all of Soviet aerospace, rocketry, shipbuilding, everything that the Soviet Union manifested as its development and economic and prowess in arms and weapons design, those were Ukrainian brains.
Mm-hmm.
They have always despised Ukraine and they want it erased.
Yeah.
And as an American, I appeal to people, look, Americans hate bullies and they pull for the underdogs. Look at Die Hard. Look at all American movies. Look at the WWE. Look at rooting for the Chicago Cubs, right? We cannot stand a bully.
This is true.
Don't shrug this off. There's an aggressor here. They started the war.
Yeah. And it's Ukraine that can finish it. I fully understand now, Chuck, why you are concentrating on Pokrovsk. I thought that really this battle would be winding down. I was completely wrong about that. And we're going to maintain a focus on Pokrovsk, and not to the exclusion of other places on the Zero line, of course. We'll be taking a look up around Kupiansk, I'm sure, maybe again at Kursk and quite possibly around Vovchansk in Kharkiv, where there's additional Russian activity. But until we get those maps up, we will be watching the news and getting ready to come back here to indications and warnings. And again, we'll have a live stream sometime soon, not before Memorial Day.
Yeah. Well, we have some great things planned. Alan and I were in what passes for a production meeting around here before we went on. We'll have some announcements to make, certainly some plans, and actually the execution will probably come before the announcement. But
yeah, that's
good stuff.
It happens.
Exactly, that's the way it happens. So good stuff. And I want to welcome Alan back from a lengthy road trip. And he's back safe from Ukraine, and it's good to have him back in the saddle again, folks. And you'll be seeing more of us.
You will. Thanks again, Chuck. Slava Ukraini.
Heroam Slava, and good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.